Ladies and gentlemen, what's going on? This is another episode of the Worthy Cause Podcast. I'm your host, Preach Jacobs, for the Arena Network. The Arena Network, where we're going to focus on people that are involved in business, arts, culture, and more specifically, politics in South Carolina and everybody that makes this a dope, amazing, cool place. The person I'm speaking to right now is all of those things put in one, to making Columbia one of those places that I would love to be in. We have Dr. Aditi Bussells, who is a councilwoman at large, part of the Administrative Policy Committee. She's also a part of the Health, Social, Environmental Committee, Economic Development Committee. She was 2021, the first South Asian American woman to hold an at-large council seat. Also Columbia Business Monthly 30 under 35, and best of Columbia's best politician, best local politician. Did I say all that right? There's a lot of stuff that I got to get down.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
it's definitely getting me a little nervous about making sure I impress all the folks that are listening, but thank you for that introduction, Preach. I'm really glad to be here today and talk with my old friend. So.
Yes, it's so great to see you. I think one of the thesis questions are always asked, and I think it's someone that is a councilwoman. I think this is a great question for you, where me growing up in Columbia, being involved in creative things, being involved in arts, there was always this thing where people were telling me, you got to move out of South Carolina, you got to go to New York, or you got to go to Atlanta, you got to go to all these places. And I came to the conclusion as I got older that staying in South Carolina is a revolutionary act. It's a way of me saying, like, hey, I'm here, I want to make it better. So everyone that I talk to, why South Carolina? And tell us your story on how you got here and got to the point that you're at now.
Well, I grew up right outside of D.C. in the Maryland suburbs. And I was, I think, very fortunate to see what it's like to live in a very diverse, vibrant community where you had people of all different backgrounds that lived in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools. And I think I took that for granted a little bit until I moved away. And I think that sometimes that area can be a little bit of a bubble in terms of how much they've progressed, with some really great policies that are truly inclusive, with how they invest in the built environment and making sure there's walkability. So there's a lot to learn from where I grew up. That being said, I am a data nerd, a public health nerd. So the goal was always to pursue a higher degree in public health. I've always said that health is the great equalizer. It's the framework that you can use to get people from across communities and across political spectrums to really find something in common and think about how all of our health and well-being is connected and how it ultimately leads to positioning our country, our state, our community for success. And so I was looking for schools and came across the Arnold School of Public Health. My parents thought it was a little crazy that I wanted to leave, the DC area where you have, Hopkins and GW and all of these, I think, great institutions in name. But for me, I wanted to go somewhere different. I wanted to really do my work in the community. And it's no surprise to anyone listening or to you that the South has been known for many years as the stroke belt. It's been known as the area that has the largest health disparities. And so that's what really attracted me to coming here. Was I like solving problems. I like figuring out the ways in which we have to identify that root cause and then make a difference. And it also helped that I really hit it off with my dissertation advisor, and USC was fortunate to offer me a great scholarship to make this PhD affordable and attainable. And so running for office was never in the goal, never in the plan. I think like many other millennials in 2020, when the pandemic hit, I was very distraught and jaded and disheartened by the national political sphere and what was happening. And I felt like it didn't represent everyday people that just want to see their community get better. And I really resonate with what you said, like, oh, you got to get out of South Carolina. You got to get out of South Carolina. As someone who chose South Carolina over other places and has lived other places, I can tell you that people often underestimate some of the great work that's happening here because of the Twitter headlines and the national headlines that are often sensationalizing, right? Some of the, I think, stereotypical things about South Carolina. But the reality is, there are some really amazing people here that are greatly invested in making it a better place. And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be making progress. And I hope that I'm a part of that movement. So decided to run when I saw that we need more public health people at the table. And I think that local politics, and you'll hear me say this a lot, there is a magic to local government. You can really set aside the political ideologies, the national fighting, and really work with people that are vastly different than you, both politically, socially, economically, and make a difference in people's everyday life. And that can be your roads, that could be how we're bringing in development, that could be what health initiative we're bringing in, or how we're addressing homelessness. And so I wouldn't have it any other way, that I've had these really interesting and rich experiences outside of South Carolina, and I've been able to bring that to my home here and really plant my roots and hopefully influence and encourage others to do the same.
Yeah. I know it's interesting because when you talk about like during the pandemic and a lot of things that were going on, I saw this huge influx of young brown and black people getting involved in the political process, not just going to the polls, but actually wanting to run. And that was always kind of a constant response of people saying, well, this wasn't what I was thinking I was going to do. Right. So May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. You had a huge hand into getting it declared here in South Carolina. What are those conversations that are not being had about people from that culture in South Carolina? Because I think that me as a black man, I think it usually becomes one of those things where people assume that minorities are just talking about African Americans and that's pretty much it. But I think that there's a lot more people in Columbia that makes Columbia and South Carolina like a great place. So tell us more about the conversations that aren't being had as much that you want to push forward.
Yeah, I think that in many ways, while I was, the first, I feel that I have the responsibility to pave the way for others to be able to elevate the rich stories and heritage and cultures and traditions that exist in South Carolina. In the last census, I mean, the Asian American population has now reached, between 2 and 5%, depending on what city you're in. And that's a substantial amount of people, oftentimes because most Asian Americans come from immigrant communities, me included. My parents immigrated here in the early 80s. They often get kind of siloed and a little bit invisible. And one of the reasons why I wanted to get AAPI month, or Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, declared in South Carolina is I wanted to be able to use my platform to help bring those stories to the forefront and to help people understand that diversity in South Carolina is much more than black and white. And there are people that have been here for generations. And so, from declaring that, I think it's been really great to see how the momentum in South Carolina has very much shifted. I think one of the first conversations that we had around Asian Americans was around the Stop AAPI hate movement, where you started to see a lot of hate crimes as it was related to the rhetoric around COVID, right? And I think that really opened the door for people to understand that even amongst Asian Americans, there's lots of different ethnicities. I remember having a really powerful conversation with a close friend of mine who's a state legislator. And I was telling him about my experience running and navigating this kind of black and white world, and how I had to really create my own circles and I had to create my own path and create my own networks. And I said to him, sometimes people don't realize that when they say things like, she's not from here, she's not from here, I'm from here, that is very much rooted deeply in this kind of anti-immigrant sentiment that I'm never going to be from here. My name is Aditi Bussells. It's the most foreign sounding name that you get. And I think sometimes people just assume that, I have a certain background or that English is my second language. And I think that I have really taken those experiences and fueled them into the fire of wanting to teach people that no, there are a lot of great stories, and us being here adds to the rich tapestry of Columbia and to politics and how we think about problems. So, Preach, I think my identity comes into play in a lot of different ways, most of the time implicitly. And it's from a place of people just not being exposed to something other than maybe just black and white. So I will say this month has been really special. It's been great to see friends of mine take that proclamation from 2 years ago and turn it into a movement. So one group I definitely want to shout out is Make Us Visible SC. They are a group of local activists that are trying to increase Asian American education, and education about Asian Americans in K through 12 schools here in South Carolina. And I have to say that I can't help but think that if there wasn't more of an awareness due to some of these activities that we did, that maybe these things wouldn't have happened.
I think that one of the things that I thought was kind of a positive that kind of came out of what was going on during, the Black Lives Matter movement was that I started to have real conversations with people reaching out saying, hey, I might not be an African American. How can I support African American culture and businesses in Colombia? And it came from a really, really, I think, sincere place where it's like, oh, okay, well, here's some restaurants, here's some Black owned businesses. If you're into art, here's some frame shops. I would also say, since it's May, how can people in South Carolina and Columbia, like things that you can recommend to help be allies, whether it's a business to take care of or a restaurant, or are there any books or anything that we should read? Like, what are some of your suggestions?
So I wrote an op-ed about this last year, specifically about what can you do if you live in South Carolina to be more supportive of the Asian American community. First and foremost, I think you should be very intentional about language. When we talk about people of color in South Carolina, do you mean all people of color, or do you mean, Black South Carolinians? Either is fine, but I think you should be very intentional about how you use that, because we have some shared experiences that I think can bring us together. But also, the immigrant experience is probably very different than the experiences of slavery within a family and the generational impact of that, right? So being intentional there, I think food is a great way to connect with different cultures, and Decker Boulevard, as well as other cities in South Carolina, have some incredible family owned businesses that really bring the true flavors of Asia out. And I think you should definitely take advantage of that and learn about the different cultures and customs. I think there's a lot of great books that Southerners have written, specifically Asians in the South. There is a book that I recently read called Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong. It's really good, and it's a great way to kind of think about the status of Asian Americans in the U.S. and what are some of the kind of unique challenges that they experience. And then there's also a book, and the name is escaping me, but it's specifically stories from the South, Asian American stories from the South. It was something that I believe I read on Bitter Southerner, and I really recommend it. You can get it at our local library. And then, last but not least, I would say take the time and effort to learn how to pronounce someone's name correctly, especially people that are of Asian descent, right? There's always this pressure to want to fit in. And I think that we're in an era where representation is increasing across all racial groups. And I think that what we can do is encourage people to show up their most authentic selves. And one way to do that is to make sure you're saying their name correctly, or trying at least.
Yeah, I think it was beautiful when you said your full name. Some people, you might think that they'll get intimidated or frustrated by it, but I think it's absolutely beautiful. And when I hear things like that, I look, we got enough Bobs and Johns running around here. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's nice. It's nice to look at my phone and have some names with some diversity to it. As you go around and are involved in the community, you've been, and I see you all the time, whether it's arts, music, culture, like you're a woman of the people. What are some of the things that you're hearing are big concerns of people in Colombia?
So there's a couple of things. And one of the things I think I tackled head on pretty quickly, not even like 3 months into being in office, and that was our unsheltered population. Looking at ways in which we can continue to be that compassionate city, because Columbia actually is the only city in all of South Carolina that has low barrier shelter, that has access to all of these agencies that provide core services like SNAP and WIC and getting your driver's license, right? So if we're going to be that central place, how can we make sure that we're doing the work effectively and meaningfully and helping people get out of these, I think, really difficult circumstances? So we were hearing a lot. I kind of, say this a lot, but I got more calls about homelessness and negative interactions that citizens were having over water and sewer calls, which is typically what we get complaints about, right? And so that was something that I heard consistently about. I'm really proud of the work that we've done with Rapid Shelter Columbia. Now we have over 40 individuals that have moved into permanent housing, and the work continues. A lot of it is us really having a moment and recognizing that while our intentions are pure, sometimes organizations end up working in silos and we don't provide the best service that we can to these vulnerable populations, and that requires changing the way that we're doing things. So that's one big thing that we heard a lot about. I think folks our age, Breach, are really excited about the future of Columbia. They want to see the quality of life continue to improve. They want things to do. I think we've changed the game in terms of we don't want the long commute. We want to live right downtown, get to everywhere we need to go, have good food, good shows, and be able to walk safely. And so that's something that I've been thinking a lot about and hear a lot about is what does that look like 5-10 years from now? How can we make our streets safer? How can we make sure that our city looks beautiful when you drive in and you feel that pride that people have that want to live here? And then, of course, I think there's always that piece of how do we also preserve some of the history and the richness of the legacies that exist here in Columbia and balance that with this kind of new era and new chapter. And so those are some of the things that I've been thinking about from the perspective of, how can we promote really good economic development that gives people an opportunity to make Columbia the place they grow their career, not just jobs, careers. How do we think about ways in which that a city can be a better experience to navigate and understand and be able to interact with if you have an idea or a dream that you want to bring to life? How do we ensure that all of our zip codes are getting the same opportunities so that your zip code isn't determining the quality of education that you have or what opportunities that you have, and that you actually do have the ability to be able to choose Columbia over other places. So those are some of the things that I've been thinking about. I think that's top of mind for a lot of folks as well. I think we're in a very unique point in Columbia's history where I think it's up from here. I mean, I think the future is very bright.
Yeah. And I think what's important is that when traditionally, when I was growing up and you think about politics or politicians, we're always assuming that it's someone that's like has white hair, they're much older. And what I think is really important is seeing so many younger people get involved in the political process. I'm always wondering, when I speak to younger people, a lot of times it feels like they're discouraged when they're talking about politics, but a lot of times they're talking about things from a national level for the most part. And kind of like what we're talking about is that being hyper local is where your real immediate change is going to happen. What advice would you give to young people that ways that they can be civically involved that doesn't just mean going to the polls? How are ways can people, you as, and I would call you an ambassador to this city because I see you everywhere and you know this city pretty well. How can people get involved? Younger people that you can see can get involved that have an interest in being here, not quite sure how to be civically engaged, probably don't want to be a politician as of yet, but they want to help the city grow.
Well, there's a couple of ways, both informally and formally. There are a lot of great organizations that you can formally be getting involved in. One I'll shout out is Columbia Opportunity Resource. Their major goal is talent retention, keeping young people here, including those that are graduating from the multiple higher learning institutions that we have here in Columbia, right? That could also mean joining boards and commissions. I don't think people realize that a lot of our citizen commissions, like the Planning Commission, the Board of Zoning Appeals, some of these city boards and commissions actually make a huge difference and impact. And those recommendations are then taken to city council. And we, most of the time, are really looking to them to help drive some of those decisions about where should we have development come in? How should things be zoned, right? That's a great way to get involved. And then I will say all of us have a platform in our respective community. And community, I use that term loosely. That could be your church community. That could be your your social network, that could be where your kids go to school. You have a lot of influence in the way people think about things, talk about things, and what issues are top of mind. I think one way that our young people can continue to stay involved is pay attention to what's happening locally. Yeah, it's not as sexy as what's happening nationally because they get a larger platform and there's all of these news stories and kind of there's this entire establishment behind that. But it's your local politics that matter the most. And oftentimes people aren't paying attention. Get involved. I know there are definitely downsides of being elected officials. And sometimes that's when, you get attacked in public or someone disagrees with you and you have a really negative interaction. But I also feel like that's when the magic happens. Be okay with disagreeing and pushing the status quo and ruffling feathers. That's where change occurs. Come to meetings, engage with elected officials and decision makers. You have a very important voice, and I think that you should use it.
Yeah. And something that I always love about you being so involved is that you also are heavily involved in the arts community. I see you a lot at events, whether it's the museum, whether it's concerts and shows. And I always would say, being an artist, some people think that politics and art are separate, but I think there's a lot of connective tissue for artists to work together civically in the community. Sometimes I feel like it's difficult to explain the importance of art in Colombia because you go to certain places and you be like, oh, wow, this community might have, it seems more vibrant, but I think there's a lot of places that might have more opportunities for artists. But where do you think art connects as far as making Colombia a better city? And it can be something that can be vibrant financially as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it connects to everything that we've talked about in terms of quality of life, in terms of economic development, in terms of philanthropy, in terms of making people feel connected. I have often said that sometimes our biggest deterrent to growth and vibrancy is ourselves. I think we take for granted all of the assets that Colombia has, all of the great artists that we have, all of the potential that we have, and we often don't showcase that pride that should be there. And one way to do that is to really embrace and celebrate all of the great art, whether it's, digital art all the way to performing arts to, public art that we've seen a kind of big boom in Colombia. So to me, art is a core component of how a community feels cohesive, how a community builds their pride, and how a community puts their name on a map. So that's why I'm such a big supporter of our artists, is because I don't think we could do any of the work that we're doing without those creative minds that are creating these innovations to help make this city really be a very special place.
Yeah. Well, I consider you someone that knows the city very well, and I think you're a curator of all things dope. So for the people that that are watching, I just kind of have like a few quick questions, and don't think long on them. Just things where if people wanted to know where to go to do certain things, to have your stamp of approval, I'm just making a list of things that we can kind of use to help make people's lives flyer in Colombia. So, best restaurant, like your favorite restaurant to go to, like if it's your birthday or something, it's a special celebration. Where you want to go?
Oh, there's so many, but I'm gonna have to shout out Koa. I
Mm-hmm.
love their mezcal cocktails and their authentically Mexican food.
Okay. Well, the next question I was going to say, best place for a cocktail.
Well, I mean, I would say bourbon is one of my favorites as well. I think Christian and his team does an incredible job with some creative cocktails.
All right. Best place to see a concert.
Ooh, New Brooklyn Tavern has to be up there. I love the intimate setting there. And then I think the Senate is a great place if you're doing like a DJ. I've been to an EDM show there, and that was really fun.
Oh my gosh, a councilwoman at an EDM show. That's hilarious.
Okay, so that's one thing you're going to learn. I keep it real, okay? I'm in my 30s. I want to have fun.
but I love it. Like that's what I'm saying. It's like, we were talking off camera about like I wanted to humanize these people that are running, because I tell people politics is basically people, right? And we think it's this grandiose mountain that has to be climbed, but like no, we have to see people that look like us and feel like us. All right, best place for a first date.
Ooh, Hampton Street Vineyard is very intimate and makes you feel like you're in a European city, kind of tucked away.
Okay. If a guy doesn't have much money and he wants to take someone out, best economical date.
Ooh, I would say, oh, there's so many good ethnic restaurants. Duke's Pad Thai is really good. I
Hmm.
think that they have some really good eats. I mean, I would go to Soda City and do a little food tour of the food trucks. I also started Food Truck Fridays,
Look at
so
you.
we do
Okay.
have that
Okay.
option.
All right. Yeah.
Yep, it's been going strong, and we have a really cool rotation of food trucks that come every Friday on Bull Street. So that might be a cool day date if
All
you
right.
wanted to do something like that. So those are the ones that come top of mind.
Okay. What's your favorite concert you ever been to? Like a favorite like performance you've been to since you've been here?
It has to be Toro y Moi. It was at the Senate, and his entire family was in this VIP
Oh,
section. He was wearing his Ridgeview T-shirt, and they were like FaceTiming family, you just felt the like extra love of the fact that he's from here and he was back home and doing this show.
and one thing about he's in one of those weird spaces where when I'm joking about artists being told they have to go somewhere. Of course, he doesn't live here anymore, but he represents South Carolina so much that his last album is called Sandhills, and the artwork is done by the Chicken Man that you see on Gervais. So, and everything he talks about on that album is all Columbia stuff. And oh, look at it. See, okay, absolutely. I was like, I need to get him on the pod too. So yeah, okay. Gosh, all right. Let me see. Is there anything else that? Oh, I think that's about it as far as like concerts and stuff like that. And this probably be what was your biggest challenge becoming a councilwoman, and what was your biggest
Ooh,
accomplishment that you felt like I'm here?
So, I mean, we could talk all day and have a whole podcast episode about the challenges of running as a young person, a young woman of color, a young woman of color that wasn't in the establishment as
And
well, right?
this
So
was
there's like
your first time running for anything.
first
Yeah.
foray,
Yeah.
yes. But I will say there are a lot of things in Columbia and in South Carolina that people say, well, that's just how it's always been done. And like, that's not an acceptable answer for me. Just because it's always been done that way doesn't mean that we can't revisit it and try something new. And if it doesn't work, well, we know how it's always been done and may have worked, right? So I think that changing that mindset and really embracing that I was an outsider and that I'm someone who represents this new generation of Columbia that wants to make this a really cool place to live, work, and play. There were definitely times I felt a little bit kind of insecure about that, but I'm really glad that that's my story. I think that brings a really unique perspective on council. I will say I felt like I made it was when I got my first ever city ordinance, which is, our local laws passed around the reporting of lost and stolen firearms. This was right after the Columbia Mall shooting. And there had been a history of the AG's office suing the city of Columbia over some of their gun ordinances. And I tried something new. I engaged the AG's office early on to give them a heads up that I wanted to do something like this. And I remember the office saying, we've never actually had a council member reach out and want to talk through what this would look like. And that law is still on the books. I had to talk to the NRA, I had to talk to the Freedom Caucus, but that law is still on the books. And the state legislature passed a similar law on a state level. So now the reporting of lost or stolen firearms, which is the number one way that a lot of people get access to guns, is through, stealing a firearm, is now a state law. And that to me was like, yeah,
Well,
I made it.
I'm glad, and that's amazing. I also feel like so frustrated about this open carry situation that's going on. It's I'll tell you the side note. What I think is really, really weird about the open carry law is that theoretically, if we're in a red state, theoretically, the governor and heads of law enforcement usually seem like they agree. But it sounds like law enforcement is just like, this doesn't make our job any easier, right? And me in the public, I was joking with somebody the other day. I said, the idea that more guns are around don't make me feel more safe, right? You know what I mean? I don't know. Has that been any topic that people have been bringing up and
Oh, all the time. I mean, and I think that some of these conversations around the reporting of lost or stolen firearms were in tandem with the open carry. And that's kind of how the sausage is made when it comes to policy, especially for Democrats. They have to get these initiatives into bills that the supermajority is going to push through. So they're like, what are some small wins that we can kind of take care of? And Chief Holbrook, our city chief, was very vocally against the open carry. We continue to have high rates of gun related violence in our community, and it just didn't make sense in terms of wanting to prevent things from happening in the first place to make it a little bit easier. So this was something that has continued to come top of mind. An approach that I've really taken that goes back to our conversation earlier is I really want people to understand that to make effective policy, there are certain things that the city can do, but there are also certain things that the city can't do. And I want to work on policies that actually make an immediate impact. So when there are times where people would come to us and say, I can't believe that this open carry is happening, I would give them the tools to put pressure on their state representatives, because the reality is, Columbia can't do anything about that by themselves. It's going to require regional and statewide collaboration for things to change. And so I hope that more young people also start to get involved and realize that local, state, and federal all have very distinctive roles. We can certainly be the incubator of new ideas and try them on a local level. But if we want comprehensive change, we gotta not feel bad about putting pressure on our state reps to make sure that some of these laws that aren't good for anyone aren't being passed.
Well, look, I ain't gonna hold you up because you are a mother, and I'm glad I got a chance to catch you just for a few moments. I'm so proud of you and being a friend, seeing the first time we talked about you saying that you were going to run to seeing what you're doing right now. We are so lucky to have you here, and thank you so much for taking the time out to speak to me.
Thank you, Preach. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
Oh my gosh, I'm blushing. This woman is amazing. This is another episode of the Worthy Cause podcast with your host, Preach Jacobs, on the Arena Network. Go to thearenasc.com. Until next time, I'm Preach Jacobs. Thank y'all for tuning in. Peace.